Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about the power grid and the vulnerability of humans. You know, before the 1900s, most of power that we had in the United States, at least in the rural communities, was basically horses and carriages, and people used lamp oil to light their homes. And they would use fire, like fireplaces, to heat their homes with wood. So you had wood. Maybe in the cities, they would use coal to burn, to heat and to generate power of different types, maybe for boilers. But before electricity, there was all these other ways of survival. And mainly it had to do with generating heat of some sort when it's cold. Nobody really had refrigeration or air conditioning or anything like that. So they used salt to preserve meats. There were some technologies that were actually pretty rudimentary and actually kind of cool, where you could take these little bulbous things that had a tube between them, and you could put water in it. And if you put that like in a wall and maybe the outside would get hot, it would cause the water to evaporate. And through the tube, which became a venturi, it would create a very cold, it caused the venturi of the water getting hot and then going through the venturi and turning into steam and cooling really quickly, and the other bulb or ball would create a cold effect. It's similar to what happens, like if, let's say that you are using a propane can, like if you have a can of propane, one of those little Coleman green cans of propane, and you connect it to your little barbecue, like if you have a portable barbecue. And what you'll notice is you can have a can of propane and just sitting idle, it doesn't, the temperature doesn't, you know, it's just regular room temperature. But once you run it for a while, where the liquid within that can is going and feeding, it turns into gas propane to feed your barbecue as you're burning the fuel, the can will get really cold and it will actually condense the air around it, and you'll see ice crystals form on the can itself. So it was the same theory of the gas, the liquid turning to gas and then leaving the can that would cause it to become really cool. So through a venturi type of arrangement. Anyway, which is very, venturi is kind of like a tight tube. It's a restrained orifice that the gas has to pass through, which is what causes the effect. Anyway, that was kind of an aside. The reason I bring this up is because I work in the power sector, the electric utility industry, and the company that I work for actually helps to transmit high voltage electricity between generators like hydroelectric dams, gas-powered electric generating plants, solar electric plants, wind generation plants, and other plants like that, to other utilities that will then turn it down into lower voltage electricity that goes to your homes, to your businesses, and even, and then we also feed some data centers, large data centers that need their own electric substation and all that kind of stuff. So why is this important? Because we are now, as a race of humans, especially in the Western world, so any developed nation is very dependent on electricity. In fact, just me making this video totally depends on electricity. The phone that I'm using to make this video could not have been built without electricity. The internet all runs on electricity. The everything that we do anymore requires electricity in some form. You plug your phone into the wall to charge it, and when you talk on the phone, you're communicating through mobile towers, basically cellular sites. All of those are powered by electricity. The car that you drive has spark plugs in it, and it requires those spark plugs to generate a spark, which requires a battery and then coils that amp up the voltage to create the spark, which is all electricity. If you have an air conditioner or a heat pump, that requires electricity. So lights, all of the lights in your house are probably run off electricity unless you use a gas lamp of some sort. Okay, so flashlights use batteries, which are electricity that feed the little lamps in your or LEDs for your flashlights. So all of this is electricity-driven technology. Every computer, every building requires electricity to even keep things going. So I'm going to tell you a little story. I was in the Bay Area of California for business, and I was at a company's facility, and one of the people I was with asked that company about some power that they were running to some equipment we were going to see tested in their lab. And he asked them, well, do you have backup power for the equipment in the lab? And the response from the company's project manager was, no, we don't, because it would cost too much to put it in, and we didn't think it was necessary, especially since we haven't had a power outage we've only had one power outage in the last 18 years in this facility. That was on a Monday. The following Tuesday, the power went out at 1:30 in the afternoon, and the power did not come on, we didn't get power back until 7:30 p.m. the next day. I happened to be staying in a hotel that also lost power for the same reason, which was a windstorm that uprooted trees that seems to have killed some, or basically broken some cables or damaged some transformers or something that allowed the power to flow to each one of these businesses. So there are areas of the city that were totally dark. There are over 70,000 people were without power in this area. And all the hotels that did have power within about 5-mile radius got booked with people who had to leave their homes because they were in the dark and couldn't charge their phones, couldn't work at home, and they needed a place where they could go and work, because there's a lot of work from home type people anymore. So they were all booking hotels to go and stay to work that night and the next day. Same thing. Well, for me, I was in this hotel with no power, except they had emergency power that ran the lights in the lobby and that ran the elevator. They had 1 out of 3 elevators was running. And so there were some lights in the lobby, but every room was dark. In the rooms, there was no light. There was none of the outlets worked. It was basically, other than whatever light was coming in the window, it was pitch black in the room. The air conditioner, the HVAC system in the room did not work at all. And the water heater, even though the water heater used in that hotel was gas powered, so there was a flame, the gas was running, the gas was still being fed, and so that the water was getting hot. The pump that would pump the hot water to each one of the rooms was run by electricity, of course, and it wasn't running. So there was no hot water in the hotel the next morning when everybody got up to take a shower. And there's some very unhappy customers because a couple of them got told that because it was a gas-powered water heater that they were going to have hot water in the morning, and they didn't. Okay, so this was just for not even it wasn't well, it was a little over 24 hours. Yeah, it was like that would have been about 30 hours, I guess, 31 hours or something like that. The power was out. People were starting to get antsy and frustrated. Businesses were totally closed. I mean, I walked down the street. I couldn't sleep at night, so I got up and walked out of the hotel, and I walked down the street, and it was eerie because on that, within the radius of the block where that hotel was, it was dark. You know, typically you see businesses with lights because there was a plaza across the street, and it had restaurants and stores totally blacked out, no people around. The right outside the hotel, the street that you drive out to from the parking lot had basically a signal for, you know, a traffic signal, and it was totally dark. Not even it wasn't even flashing red. It was totally dark. So it was I'm talking power was dead altogether in this particular area. And the only reason why there were emergency lights on in the hotel was because they had a small generator that allowed them to continue minimal operations while the power was out. Now, the other interesting thing is that I tried to call the hotel once the power went out at when I was at the business where I was doing work. I tried calling the hotel and I couldn't get through. It would basically go beep, 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 and then the call would disconnect. Why? Not because my cell phone wasn't working, not because the cellular tower wasn't working. I had service, and at least with my phone I had service. There were actually others with me who were running on a different wireless provider who didn't even have a connection to the cell site. So that cell site must have run out of power within an hour of they might have been running on a UPS, which is supposed to give temporary power, and then it died too. So the cell sites, at least in some places, were going out completely, so people couldn't get a connection. So I couldn't call the hotel because their telephone system must have been running off of the electric power in the hotel. Now, historically, telephone service used to be provided over a wired line into every facility, and the power for that telephone came from the phone company. And the phone company provided basically a 48-volt DC power on the line that would power the phone and power and provide ringing. They call it ringing voltage. And so that when you pick up the phone, you hear the dial tone, and then you could dial out and all that. So that even in emergencies, when all the power was out because the utility, maybe there was a blackout, you could still pick up your telephone and call anybody, as long as the trunks weren't full, right? So a trunk is basically, you only have so many lines that you can run over a trunk. And once everybody's calling their friends and neighbors and their family members because there's a power outage, then you can end up getting a busy signal. But the phone system worked. Now, we don't have that anymore because everybody's gone to voice over IP technology. And when you use voice over IP technology, if you don't do it right, you end up with your network equipment plugged into the wall. And when the power goes out, the network equipment dies and you don't have any phone service at all. And that's what happened with this hotel. So even though people were probably calling to try to either call them to find out if they could reserve a room, or trying to book a room, or trying to maybe even, cancel their booking or whatever, the hotel could not receive any calls. In fact, I don't even know if they knew they couldn't receive calls. But this was This was the chaos just from a 30-hour power outage in the Bay Area of California, okay? Now, imagine that happening across a huge area, not just for 30 hours, but let's say for 30 days. All of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but over that time period, what happens is when there's no power and people basically need power for various services. One guy had come into the hotel and he told us that he needed to stay in a hotel that had electricity, and they were saying, sorry, our power's still out. And he said, well, shoot, I have a sleep apnea problem and I need to have electricity in order for me to get some sleep. And I haven't slept for the last 24 hours. So there are people with medical conditions where they require electricity in order for them to continue living, to at least be comfortable, and in some cases even survive. And hospitals, even though they have emergency power, their emergency power, the generators, as long as they can get fuel to the generators, they can probably keep things going. But again, that's not full power to run everything in the hospital. It's going to be much more limited than the power that they get from the utility. So why do I bring this up at all? Who cares, right? I mean, yeah, power outages happen, brownouts happen, blackouts happen, and people deal with them, right? Well, when you are dependent on this and you can't get onto TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, you can't call anybody, you cannot take a hot shower, you can't see in the dark because there's no street lights, there's no lights in the buildings, and you even get concerned for your safety because where there's lit areas normally, walking down the street, there may not be any light. And then you start thinking, wow, this is not the world that I'm used to living in. And that causes people to freak out. Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is because there is a technology out there, and there's been a few movies about it, but not extensively to the point that I have seen. I mean, I've seen I've seen movies with limited use of this technology. It's called electromagnetic pulse, or EMP technology. What this is a way to create a super strong pulse of electromagnetic energy, similar to what happens when a nuclear bomb is detonated. And what happens when such an event occurs, which can be done without any nuclear bomb, there's a way to create an electromagnetic pulse that can basically destroy anything that's electronic. It'll destroy your cell phone so that it is totally unusable, because what it does is it fries the electronics in all of your electronic devices. It can even destroy light bulbs, LEDs for sure. Incandescents, maybe, but maybe not. All cars today, any car built in the last, I'd say 50 years, well, no, maybe at least the last 30 years, has what's called an electronic control module in it. If an EMP detonated in the area, it would basically destroy every electronic control module in every vehicle that is in the area. And that basically means that all cars are disabled. So as soon as the electronic control module dies, the car stops, probably all the lights go out, because the electronic control module controls pretty much everything about the vehicle. So maybe the lights would work, but for sure the car would stop running. Planes, if this was an EMP that was launched somewhere up in the atmosphere, it could take out aircraft and anything affected by it, basically, because planes are run by electronic systems anymore, they would be disabled, and it's unlikely that any pilot could continue to pilot the plane without the electronic systems that run that aircraft because they have redundant systems. So they may have it so that if one electronic system fails, they have other electronic systems. But if both electronic systems fail because, or even the third, if they have a triple backup, that is going to cause them to not be able to fly the plane and it will crash. Not only that, but if they have communications with air traffic control, which they do, I mean, whenever you're flying in an airplane, those pilots are talking with air traffic control on a regular basis during the flight. The communications would be totally disabled so that they would try to radio and nobody could hear them. That means they would lose, air traffic control would lose sight of them. They would lose all communication with air traffic control, and therefore they wouldn't know if they were in danger of colliding with another aircraft. That's if they were still able to fly the plane, which I doubt they would be able to. Not only that, but all communications would be dead. Now, humans would still be around. They'd still be alive. Electromagnetic pulse does not kill people, but it kills electronics. Just think of all the electronics and how they run our lives. You could not go to Starbucks and order a coffee because the little charging device would be dead. You could not go to the store and buy anything because all of their cash registers, which are all electronic now, would be dead. Their lights would be out. They would probably lock the doors up and not let anybody in because they would not be able to, and all their refrigerators would die. So basically, because there would be no power to any of the restaurants or to any of the stores, the refrigerators would basically go out. They would turn off, and all of anything that needed to be refrigerated would spoil after, just maybe even a couple hours, or for sure if it was more than 12 hours, right, or a day. So there's all that. If all the cars are disabled, that means no trucks, no vehicles would be coming in or going out of town. You would have cars that would be disabled on the highway, which means that even if there was a vehicle that could drive, it would probably be blocked by all the other vehicles that are parked on the highway. Trucks, like large trucks that carry groceries, like any kind of commodities, food, anything that would need to be delivered to your grocery store, they would all be disabled. They would stop and nobody could drive them because and so any food that's in them, if it's got to be refrigerated, it would spoil. If it's got to, but in anything else would just be stuck out there on the highway. So when you think about the impacts of loss of electricity in all forms due to an EMP, it is quite, it can be quite disturbing. And there's a book, I think it was written in or published in, I think 2008-ish, somewhere around there, but it's called A Second After, or The Second After. I don't remember. I think maybe it's The Second After. And this book basically is a novel, and it talks about this type of event occurring and what the result was of it. Now, what I encourage you to do, if you're not going to go out and get the book, at least think about everything that you use that requires some form of electricity. And I'm not just talking about electronic devices like computers and your phone, but I'm talking about anything that's powered by any form of electricity, the stereo in your car, all the wires that are running your car. Think about the LEDs in the house, in the car. Think about your Amazon account, your Netflix, your Spotify, all of that dead. I mean, even the companies that run those businesses, they would all be dead. All of their, not the people necessarily, but all of the companies all the lights would be out. All of their servers would be dead. There would be no server farms. They would stop working immediately. No data would go over the internet. All the internet would cease to work immediately in whatever area got affected by this EMP discharge. So stop and just think about that. Think of how dependent you and everybody you know is on electricity in all its forms, from portable electrical devices like flashlights and cell phones, to things that are connected to the internet, to just the electricity in your house and your air conditioner and your heating system and everything. Because there's a very good possibility that in some time in the future, there may be an electromagnetic pulse generated in a large area of, who knows, maybe someplace in the United States. And I'm not saying this because I think it's going to happen necessarily, but I've heard it enough from other people that have concerns about this within the federal government, and from reading about it to know that it is a concern, that there is a possibility of this, and how would you deal with it? I mean, first thing is you got to have some kind of way to heat. If you're in an area that gets cold, you got to be able to heat without any kind of electricity at all. Even a generator. If you have an electric generator or a generator that runs off of gasoline, guess what? That has an electronic a system that actually allows it to start and to run. And if an EMP hits, it's going to take out your generator, unless you know how to protect it from an electromagnetic pulse. So all of these things are something to consider. Now, I'm not one of these survivalist type of people that's all in a panic mode and, you know, getting all my gear together and freaking out over oh, this is going to happen tomorrow, and so I got to be prepped for it. But it makes sense to think about it and to maybe put some ideas in place for yourself and maybe your family members, if they're close to you, for how you would deal with an event where the electricity is totally knocked out and you have no way to communicate with them if they're any more than just yelling distance from you. And that you can't go and pick them up from school because your car is dead. I mean, think about that. All of a sudden, you're restricted to, okay, do I have a horse? Or do I have a bicycle? Or a skateboard? Even my little scooter that runs on electricity is going to be dead. Even a gas-powered motorcycle or mini bike or something like that would probably be dead, because there are some electronic components that are required for the ignition system to work. So you can't count on anything that runs on any kind of power like that. Think about these things. All right, this is the longest, I think this is the longest video I've ever made, but I think it's important enough to get this information out to people. So I wanted to let you hear about this so that you can at least start to think about it. Think about it for yourself and what it would mean if all of a sudden all electronics as you know it today ceased to exist. It just stopped working altogether. Everything electronic, everything electrical. How would you deal with it? How would everybody else around you deal with it? And how would you work through and manage those issues? That's all I have for you today. Ciao.